Welcome to this Law Week webinar on debt and the law. This is the final webinar in our Lunch and the Law series this Law Week 2023. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we are broadcasting today. I am on Camaragal country today, and I pay my respect to elders past and present. We also extend our respect to First Nations people participating today or watching the recording. And we also like to acknowledge that Aboriginal people are the first educators on this land. So a quick summary of what we'll be talking about today. We're going to have a panel discussion about common debt issues and your rights and options for dealing with debt. We'll also talk through a case study example. We're going to talk about some alternatives to borrowing money and also touch on those buy now, pay later loans that are common these days. And as always in these webinars, we will talk about where to get free legal help. So that's just really quickly what we'll be talking about today. We are talking about, so it's legal information and not legal advice. We have to give that disclaimer, but we will let you know where you can go for that free legal advice. This webinar is for the public, but we also welcome our community sector colleagues today, and we really hope that everyone learns something new and interesting for yourselves, for your families, or for the people you support. So thank you very much. I am now going to ask our wonderful panel to introduce themselves. So welcome. Miriam, would you like to go first and introduce yourself and your service and a bit about the work you do?
Sure. So my name is Miriam. I'm a financial counsellor at the Financial Rights Legal Centre in Sydney, and we primarily are a telephone advice service for people who have got financial problems, mainly relating to debt issues. And we also have solicitors who provide legal advice for people whose debt issues have progressed to the legal stage, plus also people who have problems with insurance products. We also have a line just for people to speak with a solicitor about their insurance issues.
Great, thanks, Miriam. Lovely to have you here today. Susan.
Hello, I'm Susan Winfield. I'm a solicitor with Marrickville Legal Centre, which is based in the Inner West, but we do provide services for New South Wales, particularly in Inner West and South West Sydney. So we give advice on many different areas of the law, not only debt related issues. We do have a specific clinic, legal clinic, the Debt Crisis Legal Service, which runs weekly. But one of the benefits of Marrickville Legal Centre is that we're also a generalist legal centre, so we can find out if people have other areas of the law and refer internally as well. We also give some assistance and advice to people with gambling related problems where there are debts associated with that.
Yep, thanks very much, Susan. And Elizabeth, welcome.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth. I'm a civil and criminal lawyer from Legal Aid New South Wales. We can help people with legal problems in New South Wales, including debt problems. The first point of contact is Law Access, which you can contact by phone or web chat. And depending on your circumstances and your legal problem, you may be able to be assisted with information, referrals, and advice, and in some cases, ongoing representation.
Thanks, Susan, and we'll hear more about those services in the webinar today. So you heard that Miriam is a financial counsellor, and what I'm going to do first is start with a couple of quick polls just to see what people understand already about these issues. So you can see on your screen, there's 3 very quick true and false questions about financial counsellors. So I'll read them out, but you can have a look for yourselves. So 1, financial counsellors provide information and support for people in financial difficulty, true or false. Number 2, it's free to get help from a financial counsellor, true or false. And number 3, financial counsellors can only help once debt collectors are involved, true or false. So I think A lot of people have had a chance to answer those already. So I'm going to close off that poll and we'll share the results, and Miriam can let us know whether everyone's right. All right. So hopefully, Miriam, can you see that on your screen there? So financial counsellors, you definitely do provide information and support for people in financial difficulty.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, what about this one? Is it free to get help from a financial counsellor?
Yes, it is always free. Financial counsellors don't charge for their services.
So very different to somebody who might call themselves a financial advisor, maybe.
That's right. There sometimes is a bit of confusion between the two. There's a few areas where their roles are similar, but on the whole, they are actually very different. So financial advisors tend to give advice for how to invest money and that type of thing. But financial counsellors, it's mostly for people who have got financial issues and budgeting issues and that type of thing.
And it's always free. So that's
Always
great to
free,
know.
yes,
Excellent.
it's free. And financial counsellors are also accredited as well and have to be a member of a professional organisation. So always, you can check before you see someone to make sure that they are an accredited financial counsellor.
And most people got this correct, that financial counsellors, you help people even before debt collectors are involved. It doesn't need to get to that stage.
That's right. Yeah, we help people right from the beginning.
But you also help if someone's if there is a debt collector involved.
Definitely, yes.
Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for that. And I'm going to try to launch our second poll, which I might. Okay, wait a minute. Hopefully you can see that now. So this is something we're going to be talking about during the webinar, but we just wanted to get a sense of which of the following options for managing debt have people heard of. So no interest loan schemes, or sometimes they're called NILs, a Centrelink advance payment, energy accounts payment assistance, or EPA, is that how you say it? EPA vouchers. And also asking your lender or service provider for financial hardship assistance. Are these things people have heard of? So we're just going to get a sense of that. Okay. I'm going to close that off now and share the results with our panel and the audience. So Susan, I guess these are things we will mention during the morning or afternoon, sorry. So no interest loan scheme, 68% of people have heard of those. Most people have heard of a Centrelink advance payment, 64% of people an EPA voucher, and 92% have heard that you can ask your lender or service provider for financial hardship assistance. So that's pretty encouraging, but also hopefully people will learn some new things today.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you have any other comments about those things, or we'll just talk about them as we go?
I think it's very encouraging, actually, that people are more aware these days that it is possible to ask your lender or your service provider for financial hardship assistance. We've had many situations where people have left it far too late. Although I should say it's not always entirely too late, but if they had contacted their service provider or lender right at the beginning, there would have been many more options for them to be able to handle the situation where they're not able to pay their, say, car loan or mortgage. Yes.
Thanks, Susan. I'm just going to ask you all some, I guess, general questions before we start with our case study. So maybe, Susan, can you start by saying what are we talking about when we say debt and the law? And I think Miriam mentioned sort of when the law needs to get involved sometimes, but we hear a lot in the media about things like mortgage stress and electricity bills going up. But what's the law got to do with it? Why are we talking about debt and the law?
Well, what the law has to do with it is that if things get to a point where payments are being made, there's very little communication between the borrower and the lender, then legal action can be taken to recover, say, a mortgaged property or a car loan. And we're looking at that just a little bit later on in our case example. But there are also a set of rights that borrowers have as well, and lenders do have obligations to let borrowers know of things like hardship variation availability. Borrowers also have obligations to, when they're filling out an application form, to give accurate information. And as much as possible, given their financial circumstances, they are obligated to make their repayments, but of course those can be varied under certain circumstances. So debt in the law, you really don't want to see a legal letter or a statement of claim or any sort of notice from a bank landing on your doorstep, because then you've got much more limited options and it becomes a little bit more tricky and costly.
Yeah, and a key message really for all our Law Week topics is to seek help early.
As early as possible. Yeah. Yes.
Thanks, Susan. So Miriam, what's your key message, I guess, for today from a financial counsellor? And maybe you can also answer a question we've got from an audience member, is what information can financial counsellors provide?
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, look, just on the back of what Susan said, communication is one of the most important things, because if your creditors are unaware of the situation you're in and they feel that you're ignoring them, that's when they might progress to the legal stage sooner than if they are aware of your situation. And another, I mean, it's so common at the moment, so it's really important that people know about these services.
Definitely. And in the case study, I think we'll find out a bit more about how a financial counsellor would go through and to help the person. So
that's right.
Leave the more detail for the case study.
Yeah, sorry, the question about what information we provide. I mean, it does depend on individual circumstances, but overall we provide advice about what your rights are with a creditor, what your rights are under the Consumer Credit Protection Act, although that is heading a little bit more into legal territory. We can give advice about your rights with regards to lodging a complaint in the Ombudsman, which is now known as the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, but basically just what your rights are and at what point you've got until perhaps legal action might start.
Thanks, Miriam. Now, Elizabeth, is this a topic you get questions about as a lawyer at Legal Aid, or what are some common questions you get in your practice as a civil lawyer?
Yeah, so we get questions about all different types of debt. Common questions seem to be about what will happen if I don't pay? Can they really take my house? And also, what are their options? What are my options? Or not even realizing that they have options. And as has already been mentioned, a common problem that we see as well is people who do leave things too late. Deadlines have passed. That means that you might have less options available as well. So unfortunately, yeah, it's better if you get that advice as soon as you can rather than waiting till deadlines pass and things become due.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, we might work through our case study because I think that'll bring all the issues to life, and we'll find out exactly how all these services can help. So Susan, do you mind reading out this case study for us?
Yes, of course. This is a sort of typical example that we might get at Marrickville Legal Centre. Very often people come to see us for a different legal problem, and we do a lot of checks to see if there's any other issues. In this case, Fatima was a little bit worried that their relationship was deteriorating, her and her husband. And after a conversation and going through the legal health check, we found out that Harrison and Fatima were both working when they bought a house back in 2015, and they have a mortgage with ABC Bank. They could afford all of their expenses, including their mortgage repayments, until a few years later in 2020, when they welcomed their first child. So now their situation has changed. They're on one salary, they're struggling financially, and their bills and expenses are starting to pile up. I think quite a lot of people are finding this out at the moment with cost of living. But with Harrison and Fatima, it's also getting more difficult to make their car repayments, let alone put fuel in the tank. And worryingly for Fatima, the balance on the bank account is often less than it should be after all the expenses that she's calculated. Now she can't afford to buy a new washing machine, and the bank won't lend them any more money to buy a replacement.
Thanks for that, Susan. So what we're going to do now is, I guess, ask our panel, what kind of assistance or advice would you give to Fatima and Harrison in these situations? So Miriam, maybe we'll go to you first. What kind of assistance or advice can your service or financial counsellors in general give in this type of circumstance?
Okay, so I think the first thing that a financial counsellor would do after meeting them and getting the situation and the information is they would probably complete a statement of financial position. So basically do a budget to show their income and expenses and look at their actual bank account statements, because sometimes what a client tells you they're spending, it doesn't always match up on the bank statement, because it's hard to keep track of exactly what you spend each day. But that often will give you the whole story, and a client may realize that they're spending money on something that they could cut back on, or realize that's where some money's going, that they could make some changes. So that would be the first thing, to just get it all out in the open, where their funds are actually going. And then you can either say, okay, so there is nowhere that you can cut back on, or let's try and cut back on here and see if this might improve things. And basically you go from there. The second thing would be to check that they are getting everything that they might be eligible for from Centrelink, because if they've had a baby and one of them has stopped working, then there's a high likelihood they'd be eligible perhaps for family tax benefit or any sort of income support from Centrelink. So you'd want to check that they were getting everything that they were entitled to there. And then there would be the case of checking where they actually are at with their mortgage to make sure they haven't fallen behind, or you would want to check if they've received a default notice. That's a little bit more extreme, but we do always check, just because some people aren't aware of it, or they're so stressed they just don't realize it. So we need to ascertain exactly where they're at with their mortgage and other things like a car loan or credit card payments, that type of thing. And then the next thing would be checking to see whether they're eligible for any sort of help, like, for example, a nils loan for the washing machine, since the bank won't lend them any money to get a new one. So that, I guess, a basic level would be that's where a financial counsellor would start with this sort of situation.
Do you want to talk a bit more about the nils loan and who might be eligible for those?
Sure. So with nils loan, that there are some eligibility criteria. One of them is that you have to have been living at the same place for at least 3 months. You have to be earning, it has actually changed recently, and the details are on their website, but you do need to be earning below a certain amount. And once you actually don't get the money yourself, the money goes to the provider. So for example, if you buy the new washing machine from Harvey Norman gets the funds, and then you pay back the nils provider. But there's never any interest on the loan, so it never gets bigger. It's just, you just pay it back in small, affordable repayments until it's paid back. But yeah, the nils stands for no interest loan scheme.
Great. Thanks, Miriam. Susan, how about, as a lawyer, if Fatima contacted your service for help, how would you help her?
Okay, so in this situation, if Fatima came to see us, The first thing we would do, in fact, is refer them to a financial counsellor, because we think that, well, financial counsellors provide a very valuable service, and often, particularly if clients come to see us early, before any legal action is threatened or it's been taken against them, then people like Miriam can help them to sort out their finances, see what they are entitled to, and they may be able to get back on track before any legal action is threatened or is taken against them. So I would make sure also that there were no default notices. That's something that Miriam had mentioned earlier. If you get a default notice from the lender, and if Fatima came to see us with a default notice saying, you are, you know, X number of dollars behind in your mortgage repayments, if you don't fix this up, and also make the payment that's due during the time frame, then we will consider taking legal action to repossess your property. That's quite a serious notice to get from a bank. It's noting that their residential property, their home, is at risk of being repossessed by the bank. So in those circumstances, we would help Fatima to communicate with the bank, particularly if she hadn't let them know before that things are a little bit tricky. We would have a look to see why their bank account, her calculations on what the balance should be in the bank account aren't really sort of matching up with what her expectations are. In this particular instance, it may well be because their relationship, Harrison and Fatima's relationship, is starting to deteriorate under all the financial stress. That money that's been taken out of the bank account unexpectedly is for gambling purposes or drinking purposes, or just a way to cope with the circumstance. We wouldn't be able to help both Harrison and Fatima in this situation, because it's looking very much like there's a possible conflict of interest. Each of them have different remedies available, and they're not necessarily working together in terms of sorting out their financial arrangements. Fatima also did disclose that there was some domestic violence that was starting to occur. Of course, this is not an actual case study, and it's based on a very typical scenario that we have when people come to see us and ask for legal advice. But we would make sure that Fatima was referred out to services that could help her with the ongoing domestic violence situation. And we would make sure that the bank didn't go any further in taking actual legal action to repossess their property.
Susan, can I ask, people might have heard the term like joint and severally liable. So what does that mean in terms of the home loan?
In terms of the home loan, if you've got both people, both Harrison and Fatima are co-borrowers on the loan. So both the names are on the loan contract. Usually the bank will also require that both their names are on the title of the property as well. But what that means is that they are both equally liable for the entire balance on the loan. It's not that they're being co-borrowers responsible for half each. Sometimes that's a misconception. Mm. So if Harrison, for instance, stopped paying the mortgage and relationships deteriorated to that point, and the bank couldn't find Harrison, then they would, in this situation, pursue Fatima for the entire amount of the loan.
Okay. And Miriam mentioned the potential of getting a nils loan for the washing
Yes.
machine. So you would all, I assume, strongly suggest that that's a preferable way to getting some other kind of short-term loan.
Oh, I would definitely suggest that rather than going to a payday lender, that is the short-term lenders that charge a lot of money, usually charge high interest, and they'll charge an establishment fee. Something like a washing machine is the type of item that the no interest loan scheme would be happy to lend, as long as she could show that she could afford to make the repayments. There's no interest or fees on a no interest loans scheme, as Miriam said, so it's much more affordable than using that or the buy now, pay later schemes that are also up and running and popular.
And we've also just had a comment from a listener who is a DV worker who's said that with a situation like this, if Fatima had been experiencing DV, then there's more flexibility in the access to the NILS loan, and there may not be that condition of the length of time living at the property or an income threshold. So there might be some exceptions with DV.
Yes. That's right. That's very good to hear, because I'm sure that someone like Fatima would be very much in need of those flexible arrangements.
Right. Okay, so yes, thanks, thanks for that comment. All right, so we might just ask Elizabeth as well. As a civil lawyer at Legal Aid, do you get calls from people in similar situations to this story? And I guess how would you advise? And also maybe it's a good opportunity to show people some other tools, like online tools that we have for debt situations and how they can help. Thanks, Elizabeth. I think Elizabeth is going to share her screen with us now. No, maybe not. Don't you love technology?
Well, especially as it worked before.
I know, exactly. That's all right. Elizabeth, if you want to just come back with your camera, you can just talk. That's okay. No, we have lost it. I might just try and quickly get to the screen share. Let's improvise here. Can people see that screen? So that's
yes.
So I think, Elizabeth, if you are still there, do you want to talk us through this Law Access New South Wales guided pathway on if someone's chasing you for money? So how someone like Fatima might be able to, ooh, sorry. Now my screen's taking its time loading. Maybe we'll just skip that bit. Oh, there we go. Okay, so hopefully you can all see this screen. So this is on a website called Law Access New South Wales. That will soon be just the Legal Aid New South Wales website, but you'll get redirected. So as you can see, there's these different tools, and one is being chased for money. So if you click on this, you can see that there's what we call guided pathways. It gives you a bit of an introduction. Then someone like Fatima could have a look through this and say, okay, let's say, for example, we heard that she's having difficulty making the car loan repayments. So we can click on an individual being chased for money by someone. If the lender has sent that letter, for example, or asking her some other way, then she can work through what is the situation. Like Susan said, has she received a letter yet? Or is she just worried that she can't pay. I'm just going to check if, no, we don't have Elizabeth any. So if she has received a letter, you can click on this, I've received a letter of demand, and then find out a bit more about steps she can take there and what her situation is. So her options might be, yes, I agree, I owe the money, or I want to negotiate. So if she can't afford it, then they can try that. If there's been some mistake, you can say, I don't owe the money. Let's say she wants to try and negotiate, like maybe to pay off smaller amounts. And you can work through, you can see information about negotiation, potentially where to go for mediation, like community justice centres. And then if she couldn't reach an agreement, for example, then she'll get some information about that. So that's just a bit of a very quick run through about the guided pathways that are available through the Law Access website. Looks like we have lost Elizabeth there, but look, that's just one option. Obviously, there's also the help available from financial counsellors and lawyers, and this doesn't replace that. It's just another tool that's available for people to use. So, was there anything else with the case study you wanted to mention, Susan or Miriam, before we move on to our questions?
Something I didn't mention before, which a financial counsellor would also discuss with the couple, is what their equity in the property is, because sometimes we have clients who get their ownership of the property not confused, but they don't see the equity and the ownership as separate things. And so in the cases where, you know, not encouraging, but suggesting to someone that the best option may end up being to sell the property, depending on how far things have gone with the bank or whichever creditor it is. Sometimes if people have an idea of what their equity is and how important it is to protect that, if you can, that can change the sort of advice we give or the sort of actions that people might take. Because some people, that they might decide they just want to try to hang on to their property, you know, until the bitter end, and they end up having the costs of the bank's legal action added to their fees, or added to, like, it comes out of their share of the equity in their property. So that's also something we would discuss with someone, just so that they're aware.
And the poll at the beginning, people said that they had heard of asking for sort of hardship variations from their lenders. So is there anything more we can add to that about their options, Fatima's options in this situation?
Yes, so because she's had a change in circumstances, so because she's had a child and is not able to work, or at least we can assume for a certain amount of time, it's going to be too difficult for her to work. She and her husband are entitled to ask for a financial hardship variation, which is usually at least 3 months, where you either make no repayments towards the debt or smaller repayments in a formal arrangement with your bank or creditor. Sometimes it can be extended for another 6 months, possibly even 9 months. It just depends on what your individual situation is. But generally, the banks are legally required to provide people with that option if they fit, if they've had a change in circumstance that they can't necessarily help. It's not a complete solution to the problem, because at some stage you do have to make your repayments, and it's important that you also clarify with the bank what will happen to the payments that you haven't made. Sometimes people finish up their hardship variation arrangement and they find they have to pay more. So people need to make sure they clarify with the bank what will happen at the end, and if the bank will add those arrears to the end of the loan, so they don't get a shock when the hardship variation ends. And that's the sort of thing a financial counsellor would either ask the bank themselves if they're advocating for the client, or advise the client to ask.
Yeah. And you'd also be talking with them about their other options for hardship variations for their other bills.
Yes, that's right. Most creditors, well, not, I mean, most creditors are required to be a member of AFCA and offer these hardship variations. And even if they're not, you still, if you tell them, they might give you a bit of time to try and sort things out.
Yeah.
And again, this is just where communication is so important, because unfortunately, a lot of people become so stressed by their situation, they don't tell their creditors, and the creditors think they're ignoring them. And then that's when the debts get passed on to debt collection agencies, and then, legal action, starts. But if people let them know, then it definitely postpones those sorts of things from happening for a while.
Thanks, Miriam. Yeah, that's a big message we always try and give people, is that sometimes little problems can get bigger if you ignore them. Right.
Sorry, if I can just add something to what Miriam has said. If you get to the point where the bank is refusing to give you a hardship variation because it's been going on for too long, you can't demonstrate how you're going to be able to get back on track. And yes, that's right. When the hardship period comes to an end, your normal repayments can go up higher than they were before the hardship variation took effect. Then if the situation is not a temporary situation, for instance, if Fatima was not able to go back to work for whatever reason, or that relationship had deteriorated to the point where really the situation was quite tricky, we may say that they might want to consider putting the house up for sale themselves, as Miriam said, to avoid all the legal fees, charges, and other additions that can just take away any surplus that may have been there before you sold the home.
Thank you. We've had a question that I guess is a little bit related to that, might be a bit general, but when buying a property with another person, what are the things to keep in mind or to know to make sure you don't run into trouble later down the line? Is that something we can comment on, or maybe that's more the financial advisor question?
I think if you're going to purchase a property with somebody, to make sure that you have a solicitor who's helping you with the purchase and who can give you some advice or answers about those sorts of things.
Yes, that's right. I would agree with that. You need to know what would happen if one person decides they want to sell they want to sell out of the property. What happens to the person, the co-borrower that's left in the property. So it can be a little bit tricky, but can be overcome if you have a very clear idea about what to do given any particular circumstance.
And also be very careful about reading the terms and conditions with the bank that you're borrowing the money from, the bank or finance company, before you sign the contract to get the funds. A lot of the answers to some of those questions will be within the contract.
Yeah, good advice. And I guess at the other end as well, if Fatima and Harrison are separating, they should be getting advice from lawyers about their property settlement.
Yes, they should. They should be getting family law advice.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So we've just heard Elizabeth is still having tech issues and is trying to come back in. So
Poor
that's
Elizabeth.
unfortunate, but these things happen. What I might do now is start going through some of the questions we received in advance when people registered for the webinar. Someone asked about the situation of if you have a small business, if you're under stress at the moment, what's the best way for small business owners to recover maybe unpaid debts? Do your services deal with small businesses, or do you mostly advise individuals?
Ours is mostly individuals. There is actually a small business debt helpline though, which I'll give you the number so you can post it at the end.
Yeah, we might put that in the email that everyone will get tomorrow. So
Sure,
that.
sure.
Yeah.
We also don't provide advice about recovering debts from people. It's our primary client base is people who owe money.
Those guided pathways I showed you before, so there is one about someone owes you money, and it does have an option for are you a small business or are you an individual? So those guided pathways on Law Access are one option for small businesses. What about your service, Susan?
In terms of small businesses, we tend not to give advice about how to collect money if you're a small business from someone else. We will give some general information, but provide a referral.
All right. So I guess, yeah, Law Access, and we'll put the number for the
Yes.
small business helpline. Thanks.
Yes.
Miriam.
Yeah.
All right. Another question we had is around if you don't have a car loan, but you're leasing a car. But I think, again, that's something that I think there's some fact sheets on the Financial Rights Legal Centre website, and there's also some information from Fair Trading, but that's not a big issue that we're able to, your services are able to help with. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct. I mean, leasing a car is always a bit of an issue because you owe money at the end of the lease period. It's usually a big balloon payment. And if you can't afford to pay that out, then you do have to negotiate with the lender on how to, you're not going to own the car until the end of that. But we don't give fully comprehensive advice on car leases, and certainly not if it's a commercial car lease.
Thanks, Susan. We do have Elizabeth back, so
Hi,
welcome
Elizabeth.
back. I might just ask you if you wanted to make some comment. Don't worry about sharing your screen. I did my best to show people the guided pathways, but if you've got comments about the case study situation and how you might be able to help people in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So legal aid can help everyone with a legal problem in New South Wales, and we recommend you contact us first by Law Access, which is a part of legal aid. You can do that by calling us on the phone, or you could use our web chat function. So that's part of our website, and you can start chatting to a real person from our organisation who can provide you with information. We have a lot of information on our website as well. I understand you went through the guided pathways, so that's one of the resources we have, which has tailored information that you can answer some questions, and it will take you to what's relevant to your situation and which stage of your matter you're up to. We also, if you call Law Access, you can be provided with information over the phone about your legal problem. You may be referred to another service, so that could be a legal or it could be a non-legal referral, something like in Fatima's circumstances, that could be a financial counsellor that you might be referred to. And depending on the legal problem and your circumstances, you might also speak to a lawyer. So someone like Fatima, we would typically see, or at least in my experience, we would often see people come through whose situation is a little bit worse than Fatima's. Perhaps she's done nothing, there's been default on the loan and she's looking to lose her home. That's the sort of situation where we tend to see calls coming in to the practice, at least the calls that I tend to be that kind of issue. So that's some ways that we could help Fatima, but there's a range of services that Law Access and legal aid can provide in this sort of debt situation.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. So we've got 10-15 minutes left in the webinar. There's a few more questions that people have put in advance, so I will ask the panel those questions, but if anyone has questions for the panel, please do type those into the Q&A box. So another question somebody had, and we haven't talked about this in detail, but where would people go if they had a Centrelink debt and they think that that was wrong, maybe incorrectly calculated? Where would people go about their Centrelink debt questions?
Initially, you can ask Centrelink for a review of the situation or the debt and ask them to provide the reasons why they believe that you owe them that debt. And if that doesn't get you the result that you believe you should have, then you can go to a place called the Welfare Rights Legal Centre. They specialise in issues that people have with Centrelink and being pursued for debts from Centrelink.
Thanks. And I should have mentioned there's a handout which I think will be attached in the chat soon, and I think that has the contact details for Welfare Rights Legal Centre, and we'll put that in the email that people will get afterwards as well. If you're joining us from a library, you might have a paper handout, I think, of the fact sheet, so that has some further contacts on it. Yep, so Welfare Rights, or again, Law Access New South Wales is always a great place to start for any legal questions you have in New South Wales. We had another question about Zip and MoneyPay and how do vulnerable clients negotiate terms. So I think they're forms of the sort of pay by installments or buy now, pay later type things. So does anyone have any comments about those types of payments?
They are mostly unregulated, although some of the buy now, pay later providers are now a member of the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, which means you can end up making a complaint about them to that authority. So generally, if you've got problems with buy now, pay later products, if you can, go and see a financial counsellor, because they can write to these places. They'll get you to sign an authority and they'll send it to the different companies and ask them to put your repayments on hold, and at least until the time that you can afford to repay them. They might even be able to look into whether or not you should have been allowed to get that service in the first place, depending on what your financial situation was at the time that you essentially got the buy now, pay later accounts. But they do have hardship sections, and again, if the sooner you let them know that you're having problems, the better it is, because they can put them on hold for you before they send it off to debt collectors. But it is a problem, buy now, pay later services. It's very easy for people to get tangled up with having lots of accounts, especially if you're vulnerable and having financial issues, and it can be initially an easy way to get past something, but it does come back to haunt people a few months later when they've got all this money being debited from their account on the same day and that type of thing.
But essentially, it's the same message. It's about communication and doing something early, because you might be able to do something about it. See a financial counsellor.
That's right.
Yeah.
I definitely agree, go and see a financial counsellor. And as Miriam said, they are largely unregulated, and they're not regulated like credit cards are and loans are, for instance. And we have seen people that have just got far too deep into debt. It seems like a reasonable deal at the beginning, and if you only have one or two purchases with a buy now, pay later scheme, then can be managed. But for very vulnerable people, they don't realise that they may be charged every time there's a late payment. It is not a free way of getting a credit type product. And with some of the buy now, pay later schemes, the amount that you've purchased has to be paid back in 4 installments. So you don't get an extended period of time to make those repayments, generally speaking, unless you can negotiate something with the buy now, pay later scheme.
Susan, you mentioned credit cards being regulated, and we've had a question about what can you do about credit card debt. And I think you mentioned before, maybe before we started, about high interest maybe for credit cards. So what can we say about credit card debt?
I mean, credit card debts, yes, they are one of the highest interest attracting products, but of course they're very convenient as well. Most people, I think, in Australia would have a credit card or more than one credit card. If you get into a situation where you can't make the minimum monthly repayment, and even if you do make the minimum monthly repayment, those interest charges are piling up and you're owing an awful lot of money. The credit card companies will be a member of the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. Credit card companies also would have a customer relations or internal dispute resolution section. So you would write to them and say, I can't afford to make my repayments for reason, communication again, as we're all saying today. We would also look into a situation of whether the credit card company has actually given you a higher credit limit than is reasonable for someone who is earning the amount of money that you are. In extreme circumstances where that has occurred, there's a possibility of negotiating just paying back the principal that you have actually spent on that credit card and having the fees, charges and interest waived. But of course, you would have to tear up the credit card and not use it again if you were to argue those elements.
Thanks, Susan. We had a general question somebody asked before, and maybe credit cards will be weaved into this response, but can you answer, what does it mean when we say, what is good debt and what is bad debt? Does someone want to tackle that?
Good debt and bad debt. I suppose if we look at the type of debt that would be considered to be bad debt, it would be those where you've borrowed from an institution that charges a lot of interest, a lot of penalties or charges if you're late with a repayment, don't respond well to requests for a hardship variation or any variation in the repayments. And those that end up with you having to borrow more money to pay off that original debt and place yourself into a debt spiral. I guess an example of good debt would be the no interest loan scheme, where you, assuming you're eligible, you can buy your washing machine, as Fatima needs to do, and pay back the cost of the washing machine without any fees or interest added to it at a rate that you can afford to pay back. So that's my take on good debt and bad debt.
Miriam or Elizabeth, did you have any comments about that?
I would agree. I think a bad debt is something that may end up when you owe more than what the item you initially purchased is worth. Yeah. That would be a bad debt.
And generally anything that has a high interest rate, if you can, I mean, sometimes debt can be, necessary, but if you can get something that's a much lower interest than some other debts, then it's obviously better than a really high, like a payday loan, that type of thing, which sometimes those lenders charge up to 48% interest for a small amount of money or a medium amount of money. And we get a lot of clients who come to us with problems with those types of debts because of the high interest.
I'll just ask one more quick question before we talk about where to go for help and what else is available. I guess this question was more about if you borrow money from a friend or something, you have a verbal agreement to pay them back. Is that type of thing binding?
Yes,
is that something you see, you come across? Yeah.
This can be harder to prove, perhaps.
Yes. So it can be proved by things like, or it can be evidenced by things like if you've lent a friend $1,000 and later on they stop paying you, but if they have made some payments, you can say, well, look, it wasn't a gift, it was a loan. You have been paying me back $50 a month. Here are the payments in my bank account. It's always better for someone to repay you using a paper trail rather than handing you cash. But yes, it is a binding agreement, but it is a little bit more difficult, as Elizabeth was saying, to prove it.
Yeah. All right. Well, it sounds like you all get very interesting situations in your work and a whole variety of things. So thank you very, very much for your time today, all of you. What people can see on the screen now is just some links to where to go for further information. So all the things we've been talking about today. There's also a handout now which you can download from the chat. If you click on that, you can see the handout, which also has some links. You will get an email tomorrow that has all these links, so don't worry about writing things down. And I'm just going to ask you one other question, Miriam, that I saw pop up earlier from someone, a guest in a library, who wanted to know, how do you become a financial counsellor?
You have to do a diploma in community services with a major in financial counselling. Well, that's what I had to do. I think it may have changed. It may just be a straight out diploma of financial counselling. The place to go to find out exactly what you need to do would be the Financial Counselling Australia. Their website is www.fca.org.au. And there's also FCAN, which is the Financial Counsellors Association of New South Wales. And their website is www.fcan.com.au, and they will also have up-to-date information about what you need to do to become one. But yes, you do have to study a diploma and undertake some practical training in an agency before you can become an associate.
Thanks, Miriam. We can put those links in the email as well. That would be a good outcome from this webinar, I think.
Yes,
so,
it would.
So the links on your screen you can see for Law Access and Legal Aid New South Wales that we've mentioned, the link to find a community legal centre near you, and also Marrickville Legal Centre to access Susan's service. If you're in a public library, there's a book called Dealing with Debt that's in the Find Legal Answers kit, and it's also available online through that Legal Answers website. Financial Rights, where Miriam works, has lots of really good fact sheets. I think some of you have mentioned writing letters to your lender. I think there's a automatic, what do you call it, precedent letter generator?
The sample letter generators, they're really helpful for a lot of people.
Yep, so you can find that, Financial Rights. And I think this is the best phone number in Australia, 1-800-007-007. You're always going to remember that. So yes, that's the National Debt Helpline. So that's a really important phone number for today.
If you think of it as the bond number, you'll never forget it.
It's the best. They got a good number. All right. Well, it's exactly 1 o'clock now, so I'm going to say goodbye and thank you very, very much to our panel. I think that was really useful today, and I hope everyone learnt something new and interesting and useful. And I'm sure you'll all be getting calls and hits on the websites now. So that was great. Thank you very much, everyone. And that concludes our Law Week webinar Lunch and the Law series for 2023. So we'll see you all again next year. And thanks again to our library hosts and to everyone joining today. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.